you looking to buy real estate and hire a buyer's broker to help represent you, but you don't want to pay their commission? You don't want to pay anything. You want to pay zero. Is that possible? Yes, it is. And I want to talk about that scenario and also what else is possible as a buyer for real estate. My name is Troy Funk and I am a broker. I have been in the real estate business going on 40 years. In that time, I've come along a lot of different scenarios, and I want to talk about scenarios and how a buyer's broker fee may be different based on different scenarios. And yes, also how to find a broker that will represent you for nothing. How is that possible? And where it's ideal to pay a buyer's broker, especially if it's an opportunity where you can make money or save a lot of money paying a buyer's broker, and under what pretense would that all make sense? Just let me dive in here a little bit. And with this, I want to talk about possibilities with compensation. And in that, I'm going to give a narrative of fees. Now, understand, this is not price fixing. Everything's negotiable when you're working with a buyer broker. In that regard, when you hire a buyer broker, you can be very specific on location, type of property, what you're looking for that buyer's broker, and even a time period. You want them for a short period of time, or you want them to help you until they find a certain property. So everything's negotiable, right? So I'm just making suggestions of what's possible if you're looking to hire a buyer's broker, because in a lot of cases, you want that to be zero. You don't want to pay them anything. I'll get to that. Let's just say you're willing to pay a buyer's broker a 5% commission. Now, why would you do that? Under what pretense would you be willing to pay a buyer's broker 5%? For me, that's an obvious one, and that is off-market properties. Let's just say that you're an investor and you buy properties that are ugly, you fix them up, you put them back on the market after you've renovated them, and then sell them and make a huge profit. Now, there's a lot of investors and buyers looking for ugly property on the condition that they're priced extremely well. Well, there's a lot of that opportunity out there right now, but those homes, those properties are not always on the market. These are foreclosures, estates, or properties where there's a bad tenant in place, the tenant won't move out, and an owner just wants to sell it. Now, most of those properties do not go on the market because of the distressed nature of the business. So if you're a buyer and you're looking for that type of property, you're looking for, I want a distressed property that I can renovate, fix up, sell, make profit. How do I find that property? Well, if you go to a broker and they're only showing you properties that are on the market, on MLS, that's gonna be your only selection to find those properties. How do you find the off-market properties? Well, this is where I would pay a buyer's broker a 5% commission. If a real estate agent came to me and said, Troy, I have a property where it's a motivated seller, it needs a lot of work, I want to present this property to you. And if I do, will you pay me a 5% commission? Absolutely, all day long. Where do I sign? I would sign that agreement all day long, because that's an opportunity for me to find out a property that's not on the market, won't go on the market, where I have the ability to purchase it and make profit. Why wouldn't I pay 5%? That is worth 5% all day long. Now, again, fees are negotiable. I would be willing to pay 5% to find off-market properties that do not go on the market that could be good opportunities for an investor. So that's where you may be willing to pay 5%. So let's talk about 4%. When would a buyer be willing to pay a buyer's broker a 4% commission? Now, I noticed that regardless of where you live, there's normally areas that are very desirable to live in, and yet you rarely ever see property go on the market in that area, wherever this is at. In our area, there's an area on Siesta Key. There's a particular condominium complex that I noticed in a period of 15 years, nothing went on the market. Nothing ever hit MLS. So I checked the tax records and noticed there were a lot of sales in the 15 period where nothing ever went on the market. Like, well, how is that possible? How is it that these properties are selling and they're never going on the market and in this complex? Well, they're all private sales. These are all sales where the buyer and the seller have gotten together. They don't need to go on the market because the sale happens before that ever happens. Now, how does this happen? The owners of these properties undoubtedly get contacted by real estate brokers saying, if you want to sell, I have a buyer. Ideally, when the seller wants to sell, they have offers available to them at that point. They don't need to go on the market. So what if you want to be one of those offers? You want to offer to live in this particular area, nothing goes on the market. Pay a buyer's broker fee, 4%. Motivate them to find you a property in that area. And if they do, you'll compensate them. Now, this is just business. It's just an idea to just say, hey, I want to live in an area. These units are not coming on the market. I'm not going to wait for MLS because they don't come on MLS. So if you pay a buyer's broker agreement a 4% commission, that is a possibility to find properties off the market in a particular area that you've identified. So what about 3%? Where would you pay a 3% commission? Well, I have a website, troyfunk.com. My website includes properties for sale all over the state of Florida, as well as new construction. So you can go on my website and you can find properties that are resale, new construction. At one time, I had an inventory of foreclosure properties. I was also putting that on my website. And with the market changing, who knows? Maybe that's going to go back on the website on foreclosure properties, but that's available to anybody. You can go on my website, look at properties. And as a general rule, if you're a buyer looking at that, now let's just say you go on my website and you find a property. Do you owe me 3%? No, because that's just marketing, right? The only way that you would owe a real estate broker a fee is if you sign a buyer's broker agreement. Now, if we never sign a buyer's broker agreement and you go on my website and look at 1,000 properties, that is your right. So how would a buyer be obligated to pay a 3%, or where should they pay a 3%? 3% is hiring a broker and saying, show me everything on the market, whether it is an off-market value or an MLS property. Just find me a good value, right? If you find me a good value, the right home, I will pay 3%. But wait, we're going to talk about how to take that 3% down to 0. But you start out offering the buyer's broker 3%, and they can show you everything off market as well that they have insight to. So when could you agree to pay a buyer's broker a 2% commission? So let's just say you went on my website, troyfunk.com, and you looked at all the properties and you discovered, I found it. I found the house. This is exactly what I want. It's the right school district, everything. I found it on MLS. Now I just need to employ a buyer's broker agreement to help me negotiate, handle all the nuances towards closing. And since I found the house, I'm the buyer, why would I pay 3%, right? I'm willing to pay 2%. So you go on my website, you find the right property, you contact me. If we come to an agreement, buyer's broker agreement, under that scenario, if it's the one house you found, I would work on a 2% commission all day long. Now, understand fees are negotiable. You can negotiate different fees with different agents, but that's where, if you've done all the legwork and you found the property, why would you pay 3%? You should pay less than that. You've taken a lot of that off the research off the table for the agent. So that's a possibility for a 2% commission. So let's talk about 1%. When would be a smart idea to pay a buyer's broker a 1% commission? Now in Florida, it's kind of an awkward situation, but I've come across this a lot. A parent owns a house and they pass away and they leave the house to their 2 siblings, son and daughter. Now, brother and sister don't get along. And especially after the parent dies, it's very hard. There's a lot of emotion. And in some cases, one of the siblings lives in the house. So let's just say the sister lives in the home and the brother lives out of state. This is complicated because the sister living in the home does own that property. She owns half of it, but the other half is owned by her brother. And she wants to purchase her brother's half of the house. Now, she has an attorney, he has an attorney. They don't get along. They don't really want to go through an attorney. They just want to get this transaction done. The sister wants to buy the brother out, and they don't want to go through the attorney because of family, and they're trying to keep it peaceful. Well, this is an opportunity that I've helped actually many sellers on, where I get involved and I'll say, look, I will help negotiate this transaction so everyone feels comfortable. I will handle the closing and make sure we facilitate this sale. So technically, who am I working for? Well, the buyer, I'm a buyer's broker for the buyer, and I'm negotiating with her brother, the seller. And yet everybody wants this transaction to come together, but they're careful how they do it because they don't want this to become litigious. They want this to be peaceful. 1% commission, if the transaction's given to me that way, I will help bring that transaction together so everybody wins. And sister ends up owning the house, brother gets his half out. And sadly, I see a lot of this situation in Florida where siblings acquire a property and now they own a property jointly. They don't agree. It's very emotional based on the loss of a parent, and it becomes very problematic for both parties. And either that property has to be sold or someone has to buy each other out. And if the property has to be sold, I've also found that one of the siblings is very difficult and one's very motivated, and it's very challenging. It's worse than a divorce in some cases because there's so much pain that's associated with the acquisition and selling of that property. So depending on the situation, that's where I could help a buyer purchase their sibling's property for a 1% commission. So let's talk about a fee less than 1% or potentially zero. How do you do that? Well, so how do you pay a fee less than 1% or let's just say zero? How do you get to that point in this marketplace if you're looking to buy a property? Well, we're in a very different market right now, especially very different than where it was a year and a half ago. There's a lot of motivated sellers, and a large portion of these motivated sellers are willing to offer compensation to pay the buyer's broker fee. So if the agent negotiates the purchase and that is requested that they pay their fee, or they compensate to cover their commission through closing costs and such. And even a lot of builders will do that right now. So a lot of cases, I would say the majority of the cases right now, the seller is willing to compensate that fee. So that if you're going into a buyer's broker agreement, most likely that should become zero to you as a buyer. So let's just play this out for a little bit. Let's just say that you sign a 3% commission, agent finds you the property, and now you're negotiating and you've agreed to pay them 3%. The agent negotiates with the seller. The seller says, look, I will give a 2.5% compensation towards your fee. So, okay, so now instead of 3%, you owe 0.5%. But wait a minute, you don't even want to pay that, right? I mean, you want to get to zero. After you sign a buyer's broker agreement, can you renegotiate? Yes, you can. So if it's the right house and the seller's willing to pay 2.5 and you've agreed to pay 3 of the buyer's broker fee, can you still get that to zero? Very possible. So that's something to know as you move forward, that commissions are negotiable. You negotiate what you want, but depending on the scenario, you may look at the opportunity that, you know what, I want to pay a buyer's broker agreement if I get a certain property, because it's the big picture you got to look at. Am I getting what I'm wanting? Especially if it's an opportunity where it could be a profitable property or property way under market. And a lot of people lose sight of that. What is a 3% commission if you're buying a property 20% under value, right? I mean, it depends on the scenario. Brokers' fees are negotiable. So in closing, I hope I've been helpful to you. My name is Troy Funk. I am a broker in Florida. I'm the broker of Realty One Group, Skyline in Sarasota. Our corporate company, Realty One Group, has 29 offices in Florida and is a national company. So we have offices all over the world at this point. And if you're looking for a buyer's broker, I welcome the opportunity to help connect you with the right person based on your scenario. And again, depending on what you're looking for, the fee could be 5%, or in most cases, it's going to end out to be zero. That's negotiable. That's when you meet with a buyer's broker, determine what your needs are, and the two of you agree on a win-win situation. So in closing, I thank you for your time and I wish you well.